Well, hello there, humans, mammals, marsupials, water-dwelling, big bloody fish. I don't care who you are, where you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you're doing it to. Bushka on Blitz here with another dose of the hot salt. Today we're going to be talking about heavy tanks, how to heavy, the how to medium series or singular was received exceptionally well. Club Wargaming, they were nice enough to shove it up on the old forums on the portal there, the North American portal. A bit of housekeeping there. If you do want to have a chat, always on the forums, Asian server forums and the North American server forums. Send me a message there. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Down below, click the big red button, subscriber. Follow me on Twitter, at Bushka on Blitz. And it's well worth a follow because when we do stream, quite often I've been streaming lately with Aegon, Snake Eyes, all the boys. You can follow the streams. I announce them on Twitter. If you are on Show TV, if you download the Show TV app, shou.tv, from the iTunes store on iOS, or just go to the web-based app, you'll be able to follow me. I am Nudity J Fandango or Bushka Tanks on there. But yeah, also look at the Twitter feed. There's a link to it in there as well. Likewise, if you haven't already, you can jump on the channel here and have a chat to people. The banter is always fantastic. And again, thank you all so much for the support. I know a few of you have thrown donations in the old PayPal bin up the top right. It's always much appreciated and goes towards funding the premium time, churning up the XP there. Heavy tanks. I thought after doing the medium thing that heavy tanks would be a bit dull and uninteresting. However, the deeper I delved and the further I looked, the more I realised that the sweet pugilistic science of heavy tanks, the fascinating biff, bang and hit point swap that is heavy tanks, is actually far more complex and interesting than the medium side of the game. The reason I say that is because mediums basically get to bugger off and do what they want. They have this flexible nature where they can just roam around the battlefield. But the rock, the anvil that holds the line and gives them something to work off, is generally your heavy tanks. Now what we're going to do today, it's so diverse, and the amount of heavy tanks there are in the game and the amount of possible play styles are so numerous that I'm just going to look and focus on particulars. And we're going to look at side scraping. We're going to look at angling your tank correctly at all times. We're going to look at how you should be going hull down at all opportunities. The map awareness that's needed for heavy tanks, particularly big tanks like the E100. Knowing your role as well, and how to deal with tricky situations like mediums and those kind of things. And we'll get into a lot more, but it's going to be quite in-depth. We're going to be having a look like this tank here, the IS-6. We're going to be having a look at the IS-6 and its role. It's a bit of a prototypical Russian tank, those really dinky armoured sides that look like thin numbers on paper, but they're so steeply sloped they create all kinds of havoc. We're going to have a look at the T-34, the hull-down monster that is in the premium tank of the American line. We're going to have a look at the M103, the IS-7, the E100, the E75, all tanks that offer a little bit of something different and help us get to know how things work. And heavies are really like that. They're all, like the IS-8 for instance, I just can't really compound that into one thing and try and shove an E100 into the same mould as well. They're two very different tanks, but they're both heavy tanks. So what we're going to look at is the pros and cons and some of the things you can add to your gameplay as a heavy player to actually improve it. Now, we'll kick it off with probably an IS-7. This is the M103. It's going to be in the video as well. We're going to talk about hull-down tactics with that and the use of mobility. We're going to have a look at the E75, the flat-sided German monster at Tier 9, and how that works particularly well with side scraping, and how it can also hold the line very, very well for a Tier 9 tank. We're going to be looking at this tank, the E100. It's got the incredible thick skirts on it that form spaced armour when coupled with the tracks, as well as the strong side armour of the tank to allow you to get very, very large angles and angle the tank quite successfully and create just huge numbers for shells to go through in terms of armour thickness and effective armour, which make it a real favourite of side scrapers everywhere. And it's got that lovely big derp cannon. But before we do, we're going to get to the IS-7. And the reason I want to choose the IS-7 is because it's a very simple game here I've got. And that's how I'm going to illustrate this stuff, by going through gameplay and talking about it. Now, it's also about map awareness, this game. I've looked at the map. They've got 3 medium tanks. We have 2. The idea here is to push top, to kill their mediums first, and then have a numerical advantage, go down and smash the rest of the team. Their team's got the same idea, so they're going to do the same thing. We're going to meet in the middle. I've blown a turbo boost here, and what I'm going to do, and you'll see this, is I've seen there's no one spotted down the bottom. There's a KV-4 has gone nearly all the way to their spawn, so I realise that their tanks, their heavy tanks, are moving up the hill towards us, and that's why I'm going to take a shot at this pattern, and then I'm going to keep on motoring, and I'm going to stop their heavy advance down at the choke point right in front of us here. Now, this might seem a little bit silly, and it might seem a little bit crazy and a little bit aggressive, but I'm not here to do damage. What I'm here to do is to hold them there, let the guns come up behind me, and then we can force the issue. And this is where a tank like the IS-7 is exceptionally good. The IS-7 has what's called a pike nose, and the pike nose is very, very strong. It's steeply angled, and it's very, very hard to penetrate frontally, but it's got a very weak lower glacis. Now, you can see this berm in front of me is hiding that pike. My job here is to hit when I can, but in the most part, what you'll find I'm trying to do is stop this E100, E75, the Tiger 2, stop them from moving forward and getting involved with the rest of the tanks and making them pay an enormous price if they do move forward. You can see he's taken a hit from me there. He's desperate to get a shell in, and he's going to get one into me firing heat, but he's going to have to expose himself so much to get the shot that he is going to absolutely get roasted. He's going to just about do his whole hit point pool to do it, and that's because we've done our job and we've allowed the tank to do its job. We're letting it work to its strengths. Getting the most damage isn't always the key, and especially with a heavy tank. We've held this choke point. We've stopped them from coming around this corner. They don't really have a choice. They've had to sit there, and it's exposed themselves to flank fire, to fire from behind. It's been a really, really solid effort. Something else you're going to see here from this tank and from all the tanks I drive is how I move, well, not always, because I'm just as bad as the next bloke, but what I try and do is move from one good situation to the next. So this looks like an open field, but there is in fact the carcass of this KV-4 here. What I'm going to do is drive straight down the guts, ram it and stick in front of it, and I'm now effectively impenetrable from the front. I'm going to side scrape back, I'll get shots, and then I'll side scrape forward. Simple stuff, but you should be doing this in all heavies. All heavies can side scrape. All tanks, full stop, can side scrape. Some can do it more effectively than others. The IS-7 isn't particularly effective at it, but it has such strong spaced armour on its sides that it renders you nearly impregnable if you can get that straight line down the side that the M103 here just can't hit me, basically. And that's about driving your heavy aggressively and being the tip of the spear. And the IS-7 can do that because its top end, once it drops the hammer, is up around 50 kilometres an hour. That's not standard. You don't often find this kind of armour profile with that kind of top end speed. And I certainly don't play the IS-7 that way all the time. But I was map aware there, and I realised that tactically there was a huge advantage to getting down that hill first and not letting them get set and grind us in a bit of a meat grinder with their heavy tanks. We basically set the field, decided where we were going to do our fight, and it was a very easy win. You'll see here, much like with the IS-7, moving from one bit of cover to the next and side scraping, the M103, while being a very mobile heavy tank with good soft stats, good terrain resistance for a heavy, and very good traverse numbers for a heavy, has a very strong turret. It can be penned through the turret. It's not as strong as, say, a T-32 or a T-34, but it's strong enough and it's mobile enough that it's very difficult to hit. And because you can do that, you want to move from one point of strength to the next. So you can see here I'm keeping my hull down on that ridge line. And I'll keep moving forward and using various bits of cover without really showing off anything that's a worry. So I'm going to move forward now to this wall up ahead of me. And again, I'm just going to hull down there. I'm going to keep my hull hidden. And the only part of my tank that's exposed is the very strong turret area of my tank. Now, this is a very mobile tank. It's not a one-line tank, so to speak. It can side scrape, but because you're quite far forward with your turret and your sides are not particularly strong, you've got very, very thin side armour, even though it's covered by tracks, you don't want to be side scraping in this tank as a rule. It's much better at being hull down than it is at side scraping. Some tanks can do both. Others struggle to do one, but you've got to utilise what you've got. Now, when you're hull down, you can see here, I've moved from one hull down spot straight through to the next, and really not in any danger of taking incoming fire. Now, because I've got a very strong platoon mate here in Snake Eyes, we're going to go forward and we're just going to DPM this IS-7 into the ground. We've identified him as the main threat at the back here. Our IS-7's calling us Team Noob. It wouldn't be a game you win easily without someone who died early calling everyone else a noob. We've all done it. We will all continue to do it because we're human beings. But what we do is, obviously, if you're working as a platoon, you want to make the enemy look in one direction and force them to open themselves up in the other direction. You can see how quickly we DPM down that guy there without taking a large amount of fire. So we've moved from hull down to hull down, killed the IS-7, and we're going to move to another hull down position here. And you'll see the angle I get on my tank. Even though this T-44 isn't really going to pose much of a threat, why give him a break? We angle our tank successfully there. A bit more front on, but he just couldn't get to us because of the boxes. But when we're moving up here, this hull down position again, we just keep our tank at an angle to him. What that does, angling your tank increases what's called the effective armour. If you imagine you have something that's a metre wide and you turn it on its side, that metre wide now becomes a much deeper number because you've got to go through that at an angle. And that's much the same as what you do when you angle your tank, as the IS-7's trying to do, but he's left his drive wheel wide open there, and we put one through the drive wheel. Now, you don't want to be using heat to go through drive wheels. That will, in fact, get eaten up by the tracks. You want to use AP or APCR to go through the drive wheel. And you see, just constantly using the tank to go from hull down to hull down. Again, we're going to take a shot here from the IS-6, and this isn't particularly brilliant play, but we're being aggressive. We want to hold this flank, and we're going to basically take him out, and then we're going to hull down on this corner area here. And we're going to do it in such a manner that even though it's not an amazing piece of cover, we turn the tank into the hill. You can see even while I'm trying to take a shot that's not very good, I'm adjusting the angle on my tank, and now we're angled as well as hull down. So even though we can't hide all of our lower plate, we've actually got it at such an angle that it's a very tough pen for any part of the tank apart from the very bottom of the lower glacis. We're going to move up here now to an IS-6, and again you're going to see we go to a hull down position. Because this tank has nice gun depression, we can peek over the hill without exposing anything. And just to finally really make sure that you've got the point, you'll see I keep looking for positions that are hull down. There's the edge of the hill. I'm going to move straight from there, and I won't sit in the open. Regardless, I will move straight to another hill where I can hull down and take shots at this T-54 without him getting fire back on me. Are you getting the point? It's if you've got a tank with a strong turret and good gun depression, hull down. And if you're in a heavy tank and you see a situation where you can do that, you can really stop an advance, or you can really put pressure on through DPM. Likewise, this T-34 on my left, he's in a rough spot. He is completely exposed. He has to keep giving shots to all around, and the M103's got a good enough gun that it can hit the pimple on top. So that's the M103. This is the E75. Now you saw us angle there and you saw us go hull down, and we're going to do the same thing here. But what I really want to talk about here is less about those two things and more about map awareness as a heavy. You look at the teams. They've got an E100, a Jagdpanzer E100, an Object 268, a T30. There's some big nasty tanks, but they've also got some mediums that are going to move up behind this E100, and they've been spotted. Snake Eyes is up there in his scent, and I realise that we are going to get folded up hard on this flank here if we don't do something. Rather than back away, the safest place for me to be is to move to this rock. Now I'm now hull down and I can side scrape. I'm going to take fire. There's just no two ways about it. And there's an Object 268 on my right. But what I'm trying to do here, and I've really put my life in the hands of my platoon mate, I've basically said, Snake, you take care of the object. I'm going to take care of what's in front of me and do my best to stop this advance. That E100 was overly aggressive. The Object 268 likewise. And we managed to bounce enough shots and deflect enough fire and make them take long enough to try and kill me that Snake was able to come up and clean house behind me. And that's map awareness. It's being aware of where your team is on the map and where their team is on the map, where they want to go on the map, and the best thing you can possibly do. If we had have withdrawn there, that's giving up what I call map control. And if you give up map control to tanks like the E100 and the Object 268, you will quickly be giving up your hit points to them as well. If you're going to have to trade hit points, put yourself in a situation where you win the hit point trade-off. Now, I'm just doing this in slow-mo because I want to walk you through. It's nothing spectacular, but that E100's being really aggressive. He's trying to push the pace of the game, and he's got to take that Yag Tiger out, because if he doesn't, he'll get shots from him, and he can't kill me in one shot, but he can get the Yag Tiger in one shot. So I've noticed that, and I know the game is up right now. I am going to be the next target. I've moved too far forward, so the safest place for me is all the way forward. I'm going to put my nose right up against this rock in front of me and angle my tank so that all he can get is the tracks of my tank or a very, very flat side. And you'll see me turn it there, and he gets my drive wheel, but he can't get through. He's also firing heat, and he is wide open for shots. We've now put 2 into him. I know there is an Object 268 on my right, but if I turn towards him, I'll take fire from all 3 in front. We bounce another from the cent. We get hit from one from the right, and we get hit from one in front. You can't dodge everything, but we've bounced another on the left there as well. We're going to return fire, and we're going to finish off the 100. Now, that was a hit point swap. It was a straight-up hit point swap, but it was one that ended up in our favour because the 268 had to basically show his weakest point to a Hesh-firing Centurion 7 Mark 1, and Cent lit him up. Snake did really well there. This Carnarvon, he can't penetrate around there. He's trying to get my hatch. He will actually hit the hatch one more time. But you put the tank like that in a situation where it can just block a few shots, and it becomes a DPM trade-off, and you win that DPM trade-off, and you might end up with only 23 hit points, but you've ended up winning the game. And that was the key confrontation in the game. And being a heavy is tough sometimes because it can be difficult without the experience to know your role, even when it seems obvious to everyone else. And you'll get people yelling at you for doing the wrong thing, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. But you're only going to learn that from experience. But remember, find a little port in the storm. That rock protected the lower glacis. It made them take time to actually look and to find a shot that could hit and penetrate on me. And it basically slowed them down enough that we were able to slowly jip them down. Moving on, E100. Brilliant tank for side scraping. And we're basically going to show you the key, I think, to the E100. It's one of the reasons I struggled with this tank so much. And the way the guy played in that last match was the key. You see, he was really aggressive because it's got a massive 640 alpha gun, 620 alpha gun. And it's got huge amounts of armour, but it's got a weak spot as big as Tasmania. Honest to God. That lower glacis is enormous and the cheeks are huge. But the biggest problem you have is E100 drivers tend to be far too aggressive because the side of the tank is so easily penned, and you've got a barn on top of that turret. And you can see we're going to trade off cheek shots here, but I'm not too unhappy about that because I know I can take an extra shot that he can't. He's already low on hit points, so we're going to basically nut him and move on with life. Now, you've seen side scraping there. Side scraping is really key, especially with German tanks. And it's a very simple thing to do. You just side scrape off a building or off a cargo container like that. This KV4 is driving an excellent side scraping tank, but it's not a good angling in the open tank. An E75 and an E100 can still effectively angle in the open. The KV4 just isn't strong enough to do it. It's not a position you want to be in, but against low pen guns, you can angle an E100 or an E75. And by angle, again, we're talking about increasing your effective armour. So you turn the tank on an angle, like 30 degrees or so, and you actually make the armour such that you can't be penned easily, especially if you bring your tracks into it, because tracks eat heat, high explosive anti-tank shells, which have the biggest pen values for tanks like T-54s or M103s. They don't deal very well with spaced armour, and tracks are counted as spaced armour. And the E100 has this huge, thick armour skirt over the tracks, which then have the armour inside it, of the shell of the tank. So you're dealing with 3 different layers of armour, and heat does not like different layers of armour. It will absolutely dissipate its power across those. So you want to be angling the tank. Now, more side scraping here. This is really the basic meat and potatoes of the German line. You'll see he's taken an early shot there. We're backing out. We're not doing anything particularly pretty or exciting. We're backing out, and now we're going to drive straight forward. You'll see me turn slightly left, and that straightens up the angle so that it becomes an auto bounce zone when he's looking at it, and he can't really penetrate anything. And then we're going to do the same thing again. We're just going to drag the tank backwards and absolutely ruin the poor E75's day. He's not doing anything particularly bad, but he's just in a tough situation against a tank like me. Now, there's a lot to be said for your hit points. An E100 has 2,400 hit points, which is an enormous amount of hit points. And heavy tanks generally will have a lot more hit points than you'll find on the tank destroyers or the medium counterparts. It just stands to notice. You're a meat shield. You're meant to be able to take hits, or for the most part. And sometimes the best thing you can do in a game is just use those hit points. And you're going to see an example here. I was talking about map awareness. Now, part of map awareness also speaks to awareness of the clock, how much time you have left, and how you can actually manufacture a win. Because there's an E100 left, that's a lot of hit points to get through. So if he's got just about a full hit point bar, that means you've got to be able to do over 2,000 hit points worth of DPM in a very limited amount of time to get him down to 0. So we're going to jump in the cap here and force his hand. Now you'll note I'm very aware of the clock and the time here. When he pops, okay, I'm not interested in killing him. All I want to do is stop him from getting a hit on the IS-3 behind me, because there's 50 seconds left. 50 and 50 gives me 100. We will easily cap this if I can just stop him. And I tell the IS-3 to cap, and I'm giving the E100 shots at me. I don't particularly want him to lose interest. I'm just keeping him where he is. I'm not really trying to kill him. I'm more interested in stopping him. And you can see there, say, good game. He gets the kill. I don't care. We get the win. Be aware of the clock as a heavy. Be aware of the map as a heavy. You can't legitimately hope to stop teams' advances unless you're aware of where the rest of the enemy is. If you see one tank in front of you, there are 6 tanks unaccounted, and you'll often hear, if you do watch Snake and I stream or Agon stream and we're on TeamSpeak, you'll actually hear us saying, I see 3, I see 5, I'm missing 2, or I'm missing 1, or I'm missing a tank destroyer or whatever, because we're watching the map and we're being aware of how many enemy tanks there are and where the tanks that we can't see are likely to be. Little things like that will help you whether you're a tank destroyer, you're a heavy, or you're medium, but particularly with a heavy tank, you want to know where the enemy is going to be coming from. Now, something else in all heavy tanks, regardless of who you are, see this T-54, he can easily COD me. He can get around me and I can't turn my turret in time to hit him. So what I do is simply take that for granted and I put my turret where I expect him to go rather than where he is. A lot of people make the mistake in Mouse and E100s and IS-4s and tanks that can be Circle of Death in trying to track the enemy medium. Look, here I go. I'm following him left. He's going to be too quick. I immediately give it up and I start turning my tank, my ass towards where he is and cut him off. You'll see he goes behind me. He can't reverse. I've already got there and he is now on my right flank and he is under my gun. And I'm going to keep turning and there's a hill behind me and he cannot go up it and get back around behind me. I can't speak enough about how important it is to utilize the cover around you as a heavy tank. Tank destroyers, this goes exactly for tank destroyers as well, like the T-95 and the E3. You want to use buildings and obstacles to stop circle of deathing mediums from getting behind you and putting shots in your unprotected ass. And in tanks like the E100, which are exceptionally slow and have very low rates of traverse, you have to be aware that you can actually turn towards the position the medium is going to be in, and generally, unless they're very good players, they will overshoot the mark, keep turning around, and end up in front of your gun. it adds an element of risk and surprise to those guys, and they're not prepared for it. And you can see here, we're in the IS-4. Now, this is a different kind of heavy tank again. This is very thin armour at excessive slopes with very limited gun depression and low penetration. So we've got to be a bit more clever about this in a Tier 9 game. How can we get shots on these tanks? Well, what we can do is move up the hill and keep going just over that little slope onto that flat surface and then fire over the side of the tank. Now, gun depression is a great stat. For instance, a Leopard has excellent gun depression, but it has crap gun depression at the rear. So you want to make sure that you're firing over the front of the tank. The IS-6, likewise, has rubbish gun depression at the front, but if you get it on a side like this and get it flat, it can shoot all kinds of things. So you'll see me constantly working this little hill, just moving backwards and forwards, letting the IS-6 do its work, and you'll see how many shots it bounces. For a Tier 8 heavy tank with very, very limited armour profile, it bounces an awful lot of shots, way more than it deserves to, because it's not the hand of Stalin. It is actually the severe 60-odd degrees of armour sloping that exists on the IS-6 and tanks of its like the IS-4 and those kind of Russian heavy tanks have these awkward angles all over, and there is never one single spot that you should always have the enemy hitting. You basically want to re-angle and readjust your tank at all times, and it's that actually makes this tank a little bit of fun, because while it's very good for grinding credits, it also is a bit of a thinking man's heavy. When you're in a Tier 9 game like this, you have trouble penning, you've got to find side shots, and you can see bouncing that Jag Tiger there. We've got no business as a Tier 8 medium frontally bouncing Tier 9 tank destroyers, but we're just always moving, and you'll see even with this T-54, readjusting your angles. We never give him square on shots, always making him take shots at an angle and bouncing and moving him. There we go, we readjust, we bounce on the side from the IS. You'll bounce more shots off your ass in tanks like this and the IS-7 than you will off the front some days. And that's part of being a heavy. Excuse me, boys and girls, bit of a cough. You never give them a clear angle. You always angle your tank towards the next shot or the next threat. And if you've got multiple targets, you want to be angling towards the next target that you think is going to reload. And that comes with experience. And you'll see there, that T-54, not very experienced. He didn't reset the cap despite the fact that we killed everything up top for him. Now we're going to look at the same map, but we're going to look at it from the perspective of the T-34. T-34 has incredibly weak hull armour, but it has an excellent, excellent turret. Very, very hard to stop. The KV-3 next to me has crap gun depression. The T-34 has brilliant negative 10 degrees of gun depression on a heavy, something very lovely. We're going to take one there, being a bit ambitious, but you can see I've angled the tank. Even though I don't have great armour at the front, I'm putting it at such a point that it's showing the strongest part of it. Now the KV-3, he's frustrated, he can't get shots. He's moved all the way over the top of the hill to get that shot, and he's given up a huge chunk of hit points in the process. That Jag, again, we're going to get one into him. Now we've probably been a little bit ambitious there, and we deserve that one, so we repair, move back down, start repeating the process. The KV-3 is still open for all and sundry to take a shot at him. You can see how much easier this is when you've got gun depression on a heavy tank than having to go up and manufacture shots and expose yourself like I had to in the IS-6. You can just simply sit back and use this wonderful hull down ability that these American tanks seem to possess, and great penetration values in the T-34, mind you. Now what you're going to note here is, like with the IS-7, where I moved from one strong position to the next, I'm going to keep using the carcasses of burned out tanks to go hull down and hide that weak lower chassis and use only the top super strong, super well armoured part of my tank. Now I've been looking for that Indian, there he goes, he's popped up. Now remember what we talked about with heavy tanks like the E100 not being circled and making sure we're backing away, we're giving ourselves space. We always want to give space. Now we angle the tank as much as possible and we repair. Now he's going to want to move and circle again. We're going to get out in front of him and stop him from doing that. You can't always stop them from penning you, but you can make sure that I'm making sure that this Indian is going to get penned by me and by the guy down there as well in the IS-6. You can see he has clearly got shots because I've kept him trapped where I want him. And then as soon as he's dead, we use his carcass again to go hull down. It's the way forward. If you've got no bloody armour on the lower part of your tank, go hull down. We're constantly doing it, and it's a good thing too because this tank has an eggshell-like frontal glacis. It's very easily penned. God, that was a terrible shot. This M4A3E, he makes life pretty easy for us. He just comes up and he rams us, and we jam him straight up again, get him stuck in between the old Indian and ourselves, and he's going the way of the dodo. Now, we've talked about hull down quite a bit. We've talked about angling your tank at all times. And you'll see good players do that all the time. Moving backwards and forwards a lot is another thing. I don't do that enough. Almost like you've got a ADD or something, you know. You've got to keep moving that tank backwards and forwards because you never do know who's looking at you. And we're just not giving this guy any shots. Never give a full and even break, especially in this game. We've all seen so many situations where you think you've got the win and something crazy happens, and that's because generally people get lazy. We've all done it, and with heavy tanks it's particularly brutal. You can bully some people, but you fall in love with being a bully. You can open up your flanks in an E100 or something like that, and life becomes very, very tough indeed. Now we're going to have a quick squeeze here at an interesting situation. Map aware, they've got masses of mediums. They have 5 medium tanks. On mines that usually spells a disaster. But I've got a good platoon mate with me. He's very clever. Snake Eyes is going to go up there, and he has proximity spotted that E50, and we're in a position now where none of these mediums are going to pen us if we don't want them to. And if they do fire at us, they will then immediately expose themselves, like that T43. And you can see that's a bad thing. So they may have map control at the top, but they've actually got control of an area that we're not really that worried about. And unless they're going to start putting pressure on from the cap, I am very comfortable to sit here. Now, this may seem a touch boring, but remember what I talked about with knowing your role on the battlefield and how sometimes that can be a difficult thing to do. A lot of people here would think their role was just to come churning up that hill and then push the hill, bloody-minded pushing, and get shot in the arse the whole time by mediums that are sitting up there. And rest assured, there is a T-54 sitting up in those bushes waiting for me. And I realise this. That E50's moved down. He's frustrated as well. We're just holding the line, and we will actually rack up well in excess of 3,000 damage here. Just over time, we'll take a lot of hits. You can see the T-54's just shot there. Someone's up there. I know that someone's still up there. And we're just frustrating them. We're not giving them anything. There's literally nothing they can do here. And the E75 is a great tank for that. It's got an exceptionally well-sloped, knife-like frontal. You can see the edge on the front of that tank, the upper and lower glacis where it meets. It's very, very sharp. And it's very strong in both its side armour and the flatness of the armour. So you can angle it and actually bounce a lot of shots. So it's a really good open field angling tank. And the E50's had just about enough. I waited till camos dropped, so I now know I can charge up here, and he's caught out in a really bad position. Not a normal way to play this map, but this is how I like to play this map when we've got no chance whatsoever of taking the hill. And it frustrates. You can see this T-54 has had enough of me. He wants me gone big style. He could go and chase anyone else on the whole map, and he's come at the T9 heavy tank, the E75. He's firing heat too. He's blowing the cash to try and do the number, but it's not going to help him. That's something about being a heavy tank that is probably the hardest thing to know. It seems really obvious, but sometimes just grinding up the hill is not the smart way to go. Sometimes being the tip of the spear is all well and good, and other times it's not. And it just comes with experience. But you can see there, that's a great little spot if you're on mines and you've got the right kind of tank. You can hang back there and just hold a line. Let everyone else go lighthouse. You'll get great cover. And this is what happens when you do actually get the hill, or you at least contest the hill strongly. And we're going to go on a very offensive-minded side-scraping run here. That rock ahead of us is our first point of contact. All we're trying to do, we're not going to stop and dick around. We're going to get to the safest point, and then we begin our little assault on mountain damage. You can see here we've moved all the way up, get a shot in the back of the T-54, and we're now side scraping off this rock. Now, the only thing that's better than side scraping off a rock is side scraping off a rock inside the cap circle, and we do that in a second. I'm a huge fan of using the cap to put pressure, and if you're a heavy driver who likes to do that, hats off to you. It's the best thing to do. People get really, really shitty about it and think you're being cheap, but the cap is there. Mediums don't give up half their mobility just to be fair to everyone else. Why the hell should heavies? Get in the cap, side scrape off an obstacle, make them come to you at a position that really suits you. Now, not everyone can do this, and it certainly needs a big, strong side scraping tank. Tanks that are really good at side scraping are great for this. Some of your tanks with thinner sides can't get away from it, because basically the way side scraping works is if your armour gets hit by something with a caliber 3 times as large as say you have a 50mm flat surface in the side of your tank, and if you get hit by a 150mm gun, it's just going to auto pen. It doesn't matter. So side scraping with those kind of tanks isn't advisable. But for an E100, you can see here, we're now in the cap. We've got shots with 620 average alpha across, and the E100, their E100 is looking at me. I am just waiting. There's the shot. I then get to go out and do whatever the hell I want. Miss, but, look at all the pressure. They've got no choice. They can't back off. They have to be here. They're in an absolute shocker. This is a really good lesson, guys. You should be using the cap to build pressure on enemy tanks. And I'm not even worried about capping. All I'm doing is just using it as a tool to give myself shots. They can't afford to back off. They can't afford to move away. At the end of the day, it's a great way of doing business. So, look, there's so much more to learn about with heavy tanks. It's myriad. Just the amount of ways and means you've got to drive these things, and there's so many nuanced bits about different maps, like you saw there, the difference between having control of the hill and not having control of the hill. And on Winter Malinovka, doing it as a hull down tank, doing it as a tank that angles to get bounces and is a bit trollish with its armour. The best thing you can do is just get out there, drive them and get experience, and try and platoon with people that drive heavies and know how to drive them well. Watch a lot of video. If you do want to watch some of the streams we do, please do subscribe to me on Twitter, at Bushka on Blitz, and jump on there. And when we do stream, you'll see it all pop up live, large and loud, and you can follow along. And I'm certainly not claiming to be a fantastic heavy driver whatsoever, but I am saying that I get my money and make my way in the world by being a little bit smarter about things and less about just being really, really good at firing. Excuse me. So, look, boys, girls, wonderful having you with me here today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll probably have to do another How to Heavy. I'm going to do a How to TD in the meantime. But the heavy tank one was just way bigger. We haven't even touched on tanks like the IS-8, really. We'll get there, though. I'm Bushka on Blitz. You've been bloody wonderful. Until next time, ciao.